It is tempting to think that more leadership or some kind of improved leadership will help us and our organizations work better. But what if leadership was part of the problem instead of the solution? What if our understanding of it only maintained principles of the past, which no longer serve us well? That's what I explore in my book, Dare to Unlead, and today in this podcast. Join me and my guest, a person quoted in the book or in tune with his values, to learn from them what it takes to unlead and succeed together. Welcome to this first episode of the Dare to Unlead podcast. Over the course of 11 episodes with a guest, we're going to explore chapter by chapter the major themes discussed in the book. But today is going to be a little bit special. We're not going to dwell on chapter one. What got us here won't get us there. Chapter one identifies the fundamental changes facing business and society, which explain why the recipes of the past no longer work on today's employees and citizens. But with my guest today, I want to talk more broadly about the general philosophy of the book and of the approach it describes, because this approach owes a lot to him. Myron Rogers is the man who wrote the foreword of Dare to Unlead. He's also a pioneer in the application of living system theory to the profound challenges of today's organizations. He runs in the UK, where he now lives, a consulting practice in large scale strategic social change. He is a co author with Meg Whitley of the best selling A Simpler Way. I'm very lucky to have a signed copy of A Simpler Way, which is a marvel of insights. My copy is highlighted and annotated the whole way through. And if we have time today, I will ask you, Myron, for comments on some excerpts, but only if we have time, because I have plenty of questions to ask you. Myron has been a profound inspiration since I stumbled upon him on social media several years ago, and even more since we worked together on a common project. I can say he revolutionized the way I view change, and he expanded my horizons and therefore my possibilities quite dramatically. I have seen firsthand the power of his ideas for human and organizational development. I would not be who I am today, and I would not have thought in the way that led me to write Dare to Unlead if I had not met Myron. Myron, I'm grateful for our lasting friendship and for your presence today. Welcome.
Oh my goodness, I'm overwhelmed. I mean, should we stop now? No,
That's only a fraction of what I mean when I think of you,
really,
Myron. Yes.
no, it's really humbling to hear that. And the work that we did together actually changed me as well. I mean,
Oh.
this profound stuff that
Hmm.
is out there. So I'm sure we'll touch on that some.
Yes,
But
so
it's good for me.
Myron, that's a great segue to my very first question. What is your art? Can you describe what you do? What's your art?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I have a couple of big clients now, in which when I realize what I'm doing with them, it goes well below the surface of what it looks like I'm doing with them. What I think that I have a kind of gift for helping people see what's really going on, in spite of what they're saying about what's going on.
Hmm.
So, and in that is a belief that if people can see what's really happening and how it is they're co-creating what's really happening, it gives them freedom to choose a different path. Right? It gives us the ability to say, this is working for us. This is where we want to go. This is the direction we want to lead in, and that's showing up right, or it's showing up really poorly. And what do we have to do together to actually change that? So I think there's some sort of art of hosting the conversation that makes visible
Hmm.
what's really quite invisible generally.
Hmm. That's quite a skill. And what led you to that?
Oh well, gee. I hate to admit this, but I just turned 70 years old. So I've been doing this work for, more than 40 years. Um, and, it's a confluence of things. But I would go back to my high school experience. I went to an all male Jesuit prep school that was actually really steeped in kind of liberation theology at the time. And we got engaged very much in social change issues. And anyone who's listening to this from the United States would know that, every major city in the United States has a Martin Luther King Boulevard, but it also has a Cesar Chavez Boulevard. And Chavez was the leader of the Latino liberation movement, I would say, in the United Farm Workers on the West Coast. And my high school, we became part of that movement was a boycott of grapes for a number of years. My high school actually ran the grape boycott in Massachusetts. So I very early on, and there were many other things that went on in that school, but very early on was exposed to activism and social change and whatnot. And that has shown up in I guess, a somewhat disguised way in my my work with organizations, but the intent is there. The intent is there.
That's amazing. And what are the underlying principles of your work?
Well, there's a couple of ways of thinking about that. I mean, I probably have three sets. One is just the general view that um, organizations are living systems, not machines. That would be the fundamental one. And that underneath that is the dynamics, understanding the dynamics of living systems allows you to see what's unfolding in any complex collection of people more than an organization, systems of, and all the many systems that are there. It allows you to see, excuse me, um, how those dynamics are constantly creating the intended and unintended consequences that we live in every day, and that the dynamics of living systems persist through time and space. So you can either work with them, understand them, and try and work with them, or you can work against them. And if you work against them, you'll lose.
Mhm.
It's just the dynamics of life are much more powerful, wiser than we know. And then, I don't know if you want to go here, but at another level, I, I so with Meg Wheatley and Fritjof Capra and others, for a number of years we ran multi-day seminars trying to teach people about living systems theory and its application to social systems change. But one of the things that I came to believe is that if the living systems view of the world was at all correct and the way we were thinking about it in social systems, then you should feel it in an embodied way. When the explanation about what's going on is happening, you should be able to say, oh, yeah, that actually explains my experience in a different way. And so over time, I came up with these maxims, as you know,
Mm.
and so that would be the other level of principles that I operate from. And what with the maxims, the issue is that they very quickly resonate with people's experience and give them a different window or different understanding on why and how and what you would do to fix things that aren't going well, what you would do to design things so they go well. Um, uh, so I mean, that's the Maxims piece. And oh, yeah. And the other piece about it is you don't need a 3-day lab on systems thinking to be able to understand how, it manifests at this level and how easily you can use them. So I
Mm.
don't know if it's helpful or
Mm. Can you tell us about those maxims? What are
I
they?
can,
They're short sentences that bear your name.
right. So the first one is actually not, I didn't like exclusively create this. It was we think it was Kurt Lewin and Margaret Mead many years ago, and it is that people own what they help create, full stop.
Mm.
And I've never put that out there and found an argument about that.
Mm.
People need it. absolutely understand. And for me, it means not only do people own what they help create, but that whatever is given to any group of people, they will turn it back into themselves, which is a living system principle as well. So if you don't invite the group affected by something into the creative process at some point along the way, so that their voice, their intelligence, their wisdom can be heard,
Mm.
you're going to get unintended consequences of the wrong kind. Right?
Mm. How
So
often do you think it takes place in the corporate world to invite people affected by change into designing the change?
not very.
Yeah. You're
If you're
being kind. Yeah.
doing a design lab for 40 or
Mm.
50 people, um, uh, who in one very, very big health and care organization in the UK, and there's a lot of energy for that now. I think it's because of the complexity of what's going on. Um, you can't possibly uh, effectively lead complex organizations in a hierarchical top-down manner. It just
Mm.
doesn't work.
Mm.
And here in the UK, um, and I think across the world right now, health and care systems are under enormous stress, enormous. And how mostly they're being handled in the UK is that central government is shoving new metrics down. If things aren't going well, they put a new target of what you should do, which actually doesn't help at all. It creates more unintended consequences, I would
Mm.
say, at the very least.
But you can't invite everybody into every change. It's not how
It's just,
organizations work, right? And they're not supposed to be, I don't know, full democracies, or
yes,
it's
yeah.
going to be chaos and very difficult to run. How do you do that?
Um, so, how much time do we have?
A few
So,
minutes.
yeah. So, first of all, I would say everybody is already engaged.
Mm.
Completely, the entire system is engaged in creating its outcomes. Right.
Mm.
One of the things that you do so well in unlead, daring to unlead, is that you know pointing out that the system has arisen through a variety of dynamics, philosophies, ways of looking at the world, and that as that's come into being, it is maintained over and over again by all of us. Right? It is not someone doing something to us; it is us doing together this thing. So, um, I don't think you generally, although I have experienced this in my life, this long life, you don't get much evidence for an organization, for instance, top down, everything, everybody being engaged in everything that's going on, um, deliberately in an intentional way. But you do get places that subscribe, leaders who would subscribe to being aware that tapping into the intelligence, the experience, the wisdom, the knowledge base of people who are actually doing the work. I mean, this would be another maxim.
Mm.
Those who do the work do the change.
Mm.
Period.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
take whatever is given and they create it as something.
Mm.
Yeah. So people, I guess what I'm saying in brief form is that we're always taking up everything around us and co-creating these outcomes. So everybody is engaged now. And then how if you understood that, how would you do it intentionally so that you could potentially move the organization into generating reliably the kinds of outcomes you want, right? Um,
Mm. Mm.
so
Another one of the maxims is real change happens in real work. Is that a blow to all change management departments and transformation offices?
yes, I need to say more. One of the things that the segregation rather than integration as a energy in systems, so that the hierarchical mechanical model of where you assume that there's a line in the forward of the book, Celine, that you know constantly the the assumption that the best way to organize human endeavor is to organize it as a machine is exactly working against living, the dynamics of living systems. And when things are not that complex, and when the environment is basically easier, working in the mechanical model does work. It brings you certain, I just believe that where we are now is that conceptual approach, that paradigm is the word people are tired of, but is true in this case. That the paradigm of the hierarchical, mechanical, in the UK, the medical model, um, um, it only produces consequences of the wrong kind, or
Mm.
the unintended kind. I guess
Mm.
it
Mm.
produces sometimes things that are good and right that we want, but oh, yeah. Where I was going is the other piece of this is that mechanical model can no longer handle the complexity of what it is we're dealing with here. So in the UK, using that again because I'm quite deep into the health and care system. One of the things that's been generated over time is a very linear approach to how you do anything.
Mm.
So the system currently is overwhelmed with too many people demanding too many services and not enough medical personnel available to them. So what they have done is they break this work into smaller and smaller parts. They create a linear process for how you go through it. I would tell you that I'm going through a medical issue right now that is, I had something diagnosed in June. Last week, I had my first appointment with the specialist who needed to look at me. So 7 months, 7.5 months. In between, I had a number of tests going on. Those tests were done in a sequential thing, first this one, then that one, then that one. And then the results of those tests were not given to me. I had to chase them down. It took a lot of energy and whatnot. And there are multiple specialties in this looking at this. They haven't spoken to each other. Right. So I'm the integrator in this case, right? Rather than, and this is how complex systems work now because they're living in the legacy of the mechanical model. This is not just about health and care; it's about many other endeavors of human beings. So, yeah, it's that system is just no longer capable.
Mm.
You can't improve a linear system that gets thrown more and more complexity on it because at some point there's no more room to
Mm.
do improvement, right?
Mm. So to affect real positive change, where do we start?
Um, First, we ask, "Hey, what's going on?" I
Mm.
think this is in your book. Some, I mean, in some, to come back to leadership for a minute. There's something about leadership as hosting, right?
Mm. Mm.
Um, Inviting, here's a problem, here's an issue, here's something I, as a leader, think is critical to it. Where's the information? Where are the relationships? Where's the identity really? And how do we bring people together to actually think through things? How do we create a peer-based environment as well as understanding that we're not the hierarchy actually has a particular role still, and it's mostly about accountability for financial results,
Mm.
preservation of and ethical outcomes. So there's something in that still needs a requirement. But as one of the major high techs that I worked with for years, the leader there would always say, he said, the organization chart, the organogram, as it's called in England. I'm learning to speak the language. um, the organization chart has never been how any of the work gets done, right? It is simply an accountability system that you have to pay attention to, but
Mm.
the real work of the system is not that at all. Um, yeah. So,
Hmm. So where do we start? Hosting, creating a peer-based culture. So hosting more than once a year during
no,
town
no,
hall, right?
right. This is how you make things go
Mm,
all the time. I live with, you know, another maxim in this is start anywhere, follow it everywhere. I and that is really about people argue about how do you start strategic change efforts, and they either do things at an enormous scale, tons of money, and organized messages, or they do um, an imposed kind of change.
mm,
You know, organizational structure change. We change the organogram for the millionth time. Whatever it is, doing that. What I do is basically the system itself calls out an issue that it needs to work on. We get together with people and say, well, who's engaged in this? Who's affected by this issue and how? Can we build a design team that will bring its innate knowledge about the system and what's going on with it and how it might be fixed? Even if there's no agreement within that team about it, you bring them together with and the first step is getting clear about what the issue is. What are we really trying to do here? um, in one client I have right now, last year we started this big effort, big change effort, big strategic change effort that actually began with 4 people in a design team. The design team is now 90 people. And we meet, on a regular basis. We do development together. What would be some good skills to learn in the kind of social change arena? What would be some good tools? How do we engage more broadly the system, bring them in, the design team? Unlike most consultants, I mean, I don't put myself in front of the group. I do it with the design team, and we co-present, we co-work, we co-facilitate.
mm,
And that's one way of doing it, is that you can grow a network of people whose capability and capacity for doing good system working, living system working,
mm,
um, grows, and you have this network across the whole system. And that's the
mm.
it's different from cascading.
Huh. Yeah. Is that an illustration of another one of the maxims, probably possibly my dearest one, which is the way we get to the future is the future we get. Can you
Yes.
elaborate on that?
By the way, that came about when I was working with you.
Hmm.
That maxim showed up then. Um, yeah. Can I talk about it? I don't know. It's people tend to not believe that who they are right now shows up in the world. Right.
Hmm.
That often, what's the organizational equivalence of this? They say, oh, we don't want to show our dirty laundry
Hmm.
public,
Hmm.
but everybody knows the dirty laundry, right?
Hmm.
I mean, we all know that.
Hmm.
So let's have the conversation about it, where it comes from, what it is. The I guess on this one, the process you use to get to the future is the future you get. I um, will often say that if we're trying to build a collaborative organization. Many people now, I think, say, we need more collaboration. Everywhere you go, it's about them. But you can't impose collaboration, right? And if you do, you don't get collaboration. You get something that's congruent
Hmm.
with the way in which you're doing it. So, you know, um, well, I think that's it.
Yeah, you have to be a community in order to build a community, right?
You
Uh,
have to act as though you are a
mm,
community.
mm,
You act your way into it. Thing. I did, some work with this always. or often shocks people, but I did some work with the U.S. Army years ago, many years ago, and they have a learning process that is about how you separate learning and the learning experience from the hierarchy, so that you see the hierarchy has to exist for a variety of reasons in that particular situation. But if you want to know what's going on the ground and you want to make good decisions together, you have to be in constant conversation, and that conversation has to be flat, equal, peer based. Because if it's not, you don't get the information you need about what's actually going on, and therefore you don't respond in the right way.
Mm.
The other part of it is that you're building over time, you're building um, clarity about the complex identity that you need to maintain. I'm not just talking about the army here. I'm talking about anyone, any group of people. Is that you're part of the process you're using is to get to greater and greater clarity about what it is we're trying to do. Uh, there's something I'm holding on to, my own learning process. One of the things I'm holding on to right now because of working in the health and care system in the in the national health system in England. So it's about this, the demands of the current moment. Everybody knows this. They quote that, probably it's probably a misquote. The quote the Einstein thing about you can't solve
Mm.
a particular problem from the same thought or idea that created it. So people know this, right? But when you look at what they're doing, um, and people know what the future should look like, right? And I say this broadly and respectfully about how smart people are. They know in the health system, for instance, where the big push in the NHS in England is to create an integrated health and care system that deals with health inequalities. It deals with health of children and families and communities, population health that would be called, and it scales up so that what you're trying to do is create a healthy society, and therefore the demand for health and care interventions goes down. Right. There's other reasons for doing this, obviously. The problem is, you have the day to day problem of all these people in ambulances lined up before the door. There's no rooms for them to go into. So people try and fix this and they get fixated on what's right in front of them, and they try and fix it from the same consciousness that created it. The system will never, that system will never be able to produce the outcomes that we need.
Mm.
People do know this. So the question is, how do you do take care of the current issue from the future?
Mm.
That's my
Mm.
current thinking about it, is that how do you get people to be standing in this current mess, whatever it is that's confronting them, and to enact um, how you think about it, what you do with it, how you design what goes on with it from the future view of the future you're trying to create.
Mm.
That's
Instead of isolating, for example, the ambulance part with ambulance experts and trying to solve that bit. Is that correct? Mm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, because I mean, and everyone knows this, that ambulances waiting to unload people who need care at the hospital is not because of what goes on with the ambulances,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Yeah.
It's has much more to do with the whole system that's
Yeah.
going on. And
Yeah.
this isn't. I was going to say this isn't rocket science. The view of it isn't rocket science. Trying to
Mm.
fix it might be, right. I
Mm.
mean, it's
Yeah.
trying
Yeah.
together about how to approach this.
Mm. You write in your forward that some of the work we did together required courage. Why
Hmm.
so?
Well, what happened to you, dear?
There's some things I can't say.
I uh, I think it does, require courage, because often, you think of first innovators.
Mm.
They're usually denied, right, by the system that they're in. They're seen, the innovation is often seen as a threat,
Mm.
and therefore there's pushback from the system to expel this person or these ideas or whatever else there is in it. And that's, I mean, people are often putting their careers online. They're often, um, by the way, I don't believe that we should have organizations in which to do the right thing requires bravery.
Mm. Mm.
Why,
Mm.
why should you need courage to do the right thing, right?
Mm.
But we have created that, right? We have, if you're a whistleblower, and we're not talking about whistleblowing here. It's actually, one of the aspects of the courage that's needed is to have some integrity about how it is you really think systems work, to invite people into this process, but you will constantly find resistors, and the resistors often can be more powerful in terms of the positionality in the organization or the system, and that can have consequences for you, for
Mm.
anyone.
Mm. Mm.
Consequences go from not being paid attention to being expelled in some way
Mm.
in your
Mm.
career.
Mm. Something brings me back something I also learned from you that is also very profound. A living system will only change to remain the same. Can
Yeah.
you say something about it?
Well, it's actually two steps in that. One is
Mm.
that one of the fundamental things about living systems is that they seek to preserve their identity.
Mm.
Doesn't matter what happens. And so this is the thing about, if you throw something at a system rather than co-creating it, it will take that thing and turn it back into itself
Mm.
somehow. It'll make it meaningful for itself as it currently exists, not as you're trying to make it exist.
Mm.
However, a living system will change its identity in order to preserve it. So for me, that would, let me stay with the health system again. I'm sorry, this is has so much of that in it.
Mm.
But for me, the integrated view of health and care is the next step in realizing the full integrity of the health and care system in the UK. Right. So if you maintain the system as it is and try and fix it in that position, it potentially will die as a result of that, because it needs actually the change in order to preserve itself. Um, so
Mm. And you speak a lot about health and care systems, but I know from experience, from our work together, that what you describe applies to all complex systems,
right,
industrial systems, corporate systems, etc. It's not at all limited to health and care.
definitely no.
Mm.
I've worked in the global corporate world for years and years.
Mm.
Um, led a lot of work in the United States on public education. I've worked in religious environments. I've
Mm.
worked in governments all over. So
Mm.
it's the
So,
same work.
in all
Go.
those environments, what should change makers keep in mind? What would be your recommendation?
Well, always respect that the people who are doing the work are smart enough, and they have the information, they have the experience, they have the wisdom, um, to actually contribute to a new possibility. There was it's I would say, you pay attention to in the words of Marv Weisberg board, what's possible here and who really cares.
Mm.
And the, the other thing is, I'm lucky right now. There are a couple of leaders that I work with who are just, my breath is taken away with how absolutely compassionate they are, and how wise they are, and how willing to invite people in they are. And I would say that's the thing that people need to pay attention to more, is um, respect, compassion, caring for one another, the quality of relationships that we have,
Mm.
um, the purpose that we have, what really is the calling of the work that we're engaged in. You know,
Mm.
um, so.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I have no time to ask you about this wonderful book that is A Simpler Way, but I will really encourage um, our listeners to take a look. You see, mine has got all
Yeah,
sorts of stickers and post-it notes and so on. It's a really wonderful source of
thank you.
insights. Uh, People can also read.
I have, this
You have
book.
mine. Yoo-hoo! Awesome. I have it too. What would you say to somebody who hasn't read Dare to Unlead yet, apart from read it? What would you say about the book?
I'd say it has a great forward.
It does. I know.
Um, you know, first of all, the liberty, equality, fraternity is a way of holding, a different way of being, and a different way of being together in the work is really quite powerful. And the other thing is it illuminates so much of what's contributing to things not going well,
Mm,
and so much of what so many examples of what it is you could do to actually make things work differently, and produce different and more compelling, exciting outcomes. Um, and it's got everything in there, right?
it's
It has history, it has theory, it
mm,
has inspiring stories from people. I mean, it's really unlike a lot of business books or books for the kind of corporate or organizational audience, it's quite accessible and readable and educating
mm.
uh, as well.
Yeah, thank you. And you've probably noticed that this trilogy, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, actually resonates with your trilogy. That's why I adopted it. Your trilogy of identity, information, and relationships.
Thank you.
Identity to me resonates very much with the freedom to choose who we want to be.
Yeah.
Information relates to the flow of information, which should be free from patterns of domination and submission, which restrict access to information. So that's really
Mm.
about it being it's equality in diversity through networks, and the quality of our relationships resonates very much with a sense of fraternity we can create in our organizations.
Yep.
So once again, your inspiration shows up throughout the structure of the book. Thank you so much, Myron. Do you have any concluding word? And we'd love to know also where people can find you.
Um, People can find me, somewhere. So, in a couple of concluding things. One, just about our friendship. I guess I'd say, really congratulations for the book, and for what you're doing with it, and how you're being out there in the world with it. But also, I'd love to see you in person sometime. It's been, I think, 5 years because of COVID, and
Mm,
as you know, I had some health issues, and between those two things, I haven't been traveling, and so now back traveling, and I think I better come, see the
mhm.
new office in person sometime.
Yeah, but even though we haven't met in person for a long time, you're very close to my mind and to my heart, Myron.
Thank you. People can find me at myron.rogers@gmail.com. That's
Mm,
my
mm,
email, and I would respond, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
mhm. Thank
So,
you. And they can find you in your book, in my book, and
mm,
we'll post links in the description of the episode, of course. Well, thank you so
right.
much, Myron, and have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your year. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye bye.
Great insights. Thank you all for listening. You'll find more info in Dare to Unlead, the book, and all links in the podcast episode description. And now, what else? Action! To explore further and apply these ideas to your own context, reach out to me at weneedsocial.com. Let's unlead together.